The acrid scent of plasma discharge filled the air as Captain Rylan Darius crouched behind a jagged piece of wreckage that had once been part of the outer defense perimeter. His combat armor, a state-of-the-art human design painted in deep navy with silver trim, was scorched from near misses. Sweat ran down his brow, dampening his short-cropped dark hair and stubble, as he checked the charge on his sidearm. "You humans are quite the enigma," came a melodic voice from his side, smooth as silk but laced with disdain. "Taking cover like frightened prey when we should be pressing forward." Rylan glanced over at his newly assigned partner, Lieutenant Selene Erix of the Stellar Dominion. Her striking green skin shimmered under the dual suns, and her long black hair whipped in the hot desert wind. The form-fitting silver and white organic armor she wore clung to her muscular frame, its intricate design a stark contrast to the practical, bulky human combat gear. "Caution isn't the same as fear," Rylan shot back with a wry grin, though he couldn't resist teasing her. "I suppose it's hard to understand for someone who thinks charging straight into enemy fire is tactical genius." Selene's laughter echoed over the battlefield, a rich sound that made the war-torn landscape feel almost surreal. "Oh, you're amusing, human. I've heard tales of your species' fragility. It's almost adorable how you try to make up for it with humor and tactics." Rylan was about to respond when their neural links flashed with an urgent warning. Multiple hostile signatures were rapidly approaching. The remnants of the Dark Swarm forces, a hostile alien faction, were closing in. "Time to show you how resilient humans can be," Rylan muttered, checking his combat scanner. 3 hostiles northwest. Heavy weapons most likely. Selene's armored suit rippled as it adjusted, armor plating shifting to reinforce her vulnerable areas. "Let's see if you can keep up," she quipped, flashing him a challenging grin. "Just try not to get yourself killed." "The paperwork would be a nightmare," Rylan said with a smirk. They moved in perfect sync, despite their playful exchange. Rylan laid down suppressing fire while Selene advanced, her energy blade humming with deadly purpose. The first 2 enemies were eliminated with ease, but the third, an enemy gunner hidden in the shadows, proved more troublesome. Rylan saw the plasma cannon charging just in time. Without hesitation, he sprinted forward, tackling Selene to the ground as a plasma burst shot through the air, narrowly missing her. The blast seared across his chest, burning through the reinforced plating and his flesh beneath. They collided with the ground, Rylan using his body to shield Selene from the blast and impact. Through the pain, he managed to pull his sidearm and fired 3 precise shots, neutralizing the threat. "By the first star," Selene exclaimed, pulling them both into cover. She froze when she saw the extent of his injuries. The plasma had seared through his armor, leaving a horrific wound across his chest. "Medic?" Selene shouted into her comms, her voice laced with urgent concern. "Human officer down, plasma burns." Rylan managed a weak smile despite the agony. "Still think we're fragile?" "Shut up and save your strength," she snapped, quickly applying a temporary sealant to the wound. Only a human would be foolish enough to jump in front of plasma fire. The medical transport arrived moments later, anti-gravity engines roaring as it descended through the harsh atmosphere. The medics, a mix of human and alien personnel, loaded Rylan onto a stretcher. "I'm coming with you," Selene declared, her voice unwavering. The medics didn't argue, and moments later, they were airborne, rushing toward the nearest Alliance medical facility. Inside the sterile, futuristic facility, Rylan's vitals fluctuated dangerously as the medical team worked on stabilizing him. "How bad is it?" Selene asked, trying to hide the concern in her voice as she stood beside Rylan's bed. "Third-degree plasma burns across 30% of his chest," a medical officer reported after scanning him. "He'll need immediate treatment, but," the officer frowned as she analyzed the readings further. "This is strange. His tissue is already regenerating at an accelerated rate." Selene stared, confused. "What do you mean?" The medic glanced up, baffled. "His body's already fighting the damage. Most species would be in shock by now, but his healing is progressing beyond expectations. The regeneration rate is unlike anything we've seen before." The Alliance Medical Center itself was a marvel of advanced engineering, all polished white surfaces and gleaming chrome. Inside, doctors and nurses of various species moved with practiced efficiency. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant Erix," the chief physician, a tall, angular alien named Dr. Nessa, informed her after examining Rylan. "We're experiencing a shortage of regenerative gel. The next supply won't arrive for 3 days." Selene's heart sank. "What will happen to him?" "We'll manage with standard treatment, but we'll have to monitor him closely for the next few days," Dr. Nessa assured her. Over the following days, Selene found herself visiting Rylan's recovery ward more than necessary, returning between her duties. She convinced herself it was purely professional, a courtesy to check on a wounded comrade. But something about his sacrifice, the way he had so selflessly shielded her, had shaken her preconceived notions about humans. On the third day, she arrived to find Rylan's bed surrounded by fascinated medical staff. One of the doctors was muttering in disbelief. "This is impossible. The tissue regeneration rate is off the charts." Selene pushed her way through the gathered personnel, staring in awe at Rylan. The burn scars that had once marred his chest were already shrinking, new pink skin forming at an astonishing rate. "How is this possible?" she demanded. A human nurse with a knowing smile looked up. "It's just what we do. Human bodies are remarkably resilient. Sure, we don't have armor or strength like some other species, but we heal. Fast." Just then Rylan stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and they immediately locked on Selene, who was still staring in awe. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a hoarse but strong voice. "I thought you were." Selene started, still unsure of what to say. Rylan chuckled and winced in pain. "Takes more than a plasma burn to keep a human down. Though, I wouldn't recommend it as a regular hobby." Seeing him, battered but healing, joking despite the severity of his injuries, Selene felt something inside her shift. These humans weren't fragile. They were something else entirely. 2 weeks later, in the Alliance training facility, Rylan executed a flawless combat role, his chest still marked by the fresh pink scar tissue that was a testament to his species' extraordinary healing ability. Selene watched, mesmerized. Her professional demeanor was hard to maintain when every glance at him sent warmth flooding through her chest. "Stop staring, Lieutenant Erix," Rylan teased, his muscular form moving with grace as he wiped sweat from his face with a towel. "Though I must admit, I'm flattered by the attention." Selene fought to keep a neutral expression, though her cheeks flushed. "I'm just making sure my battle partner doesn't rupture something vital." He chuckled, stepping closer. "You know, I heard you've been researching human biology. More interested in us now?" Selene smirked, running a hand through her long black hair. "I think everything I thought I knew about humans has been proven wrong." Rylan raised an eyebrow, moving in closer. "What else would you like to know?" The air between them grew charged with unspoken emotion, Selene's armor shifting subtly in response. "Maybe we should continue this discussion over dinner," she said, her voice lowering to a sultry tone. "Purely for research purposes, of course." "Of course," Rylan grinned, his brown eyes sparkling. "But just so you know, humans are quite passionate about sharing our culture." Before they could continue, the facility's emergency alert system blared, and Admiral Zara Manson's hologram flickered before them. "Lieutenant Darius, Lieutenant Erix, we have a situation," the Admiral's stern voice cut through their moment. "The dark swarm forces you encountered 2 weeks ago weren't just raiders. We've detected a major fleet movement near the Arcturus sector." Rylan's playful demeanor evaporated instantly, replaced by laser focus. "How bad is it, Admiral?" "Bad enough that I'm calling on you even in your condition," Manson replied grimly. "The Dark Swarm is deploying a new biological weapon. We need your regenerative abilities." Selene stepped forward, protective instincts flaring. "Rylan is still recovering." "He shouldn't be." "I'm fine," Rylan interrupted, meeting her gaze. "I'm at 85%. That's more than enough." Manson nodded. "Briefing in 30 minutes. And Lieutenant Erix, keep him alive out there." "That's an order." As the hologram faded, Selene turned to Rylan, her concern clear. "You don't have to prove anything. Not to me." Rylan's fingers brushed against her arm where her armor didn't cover, sending an electric jolt between them. "I'm not trying to prove anything. But if this weapon is what I think it is, my healing might be our best defense." Their eyes locked, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Selene took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Then we face it together. But first," she added with a smile, "you finish recovering." "I thought you gave up on treating me like I'm delicate," Rylan teased, his voice thick with emotion. Selene smiled softly, stepping closer. "On the contrary." Chapter 2: Unlikely Allies in the Face of a Deadly Threat. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Despite Rylan's rapid recovery, his body was still healing from the plasma burns. He stubbornly insisted on pushing his limits, though training and practicing drills with Selene as they prepared for their next mission. His chest, now covered with pink scar tissue, would never look the same, but it wasn't stopping him. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Selene said one morning as she watched Rylan perform another combat role. She leaned against the doorway of the training room, her arms folded across her chest, watching with a bemused expression. "You're supposed to be recovering, not playing superhero." Rylan shot her a grin, his toned body glistening with sweat. "If I wait for full recovery, we'll be fighting the Dark Swarm's new weapon with one hand tied behind our backs." "You're stubborn," she muttered under her breath, but there was an undeniable admiration in her eyes. She had spent the last few days researching human biology to understand more about Rylan's unique regenerative abilities, which were unlike anything she had ever seen. It made her wonder how much more they could be capable of. But beneath her fascination there was something else, something deeper. Watching him recover and hearing him joke through pain made her question everything she had believed about humans. The day of the mission arrived quickly. The briefing was intense. Rylan and Selene sat together, listening to Admiral Manson's orders in the tactical room. The large hollow table in front of them displayed a 3D map of the Ark tourist sector and the Dark Swarm fleet's movements. "The Swarm is deploying a new biological weapon, one that targets the nervous system of any species it comes in contact with," Manson explained, her holographic form flickering. "It's an organic projectile that, once implanted, will shut down a target's brain functions in a matter of hours. We believe it's meant to disable and capture, not kill. It's their way of expanding their forces without direct conflict. That's the kind of weapon we'll need to get up close to stop," Rylan muttered under his breath, scanning the map. "I take it this isn't going to be a standard assault?" "No, Captain Darius, it's not." Manson's tone was firm. "The fleet's been equipped with some kind of defense against high-impact weaponry. We'll need to infiltrate their lines without drawing attention. Once you've located the source of the weapon, we'll need you two to disable it fast." Selene exchanged a look with Rylan. This was going to be their biggest challenge yet. "I don't think the Swarm is going to let us waltz in and shut down their weapon," Selene said, her voice low and serious. "You're right," Rylan replied, his voice taking on a hard edge. "We'll have to be smarter about this. If we want to get close enough, we'll need to use stealth and take down their sentries one by one." "Exactly," Manson said. "And that's where your abilities come in, Captain. You're the key to getting this done." Rylan gave a half-smile, despite the weight of the situation. "Pressure's on, huh?" Selene couldn't help but roll her eyes. Rylan had a way of making even the most dangerous situation seem almost lighthearted, though she knew he was every bit as serious as she was about stopping the Dark Swarm. "We'll brief you on the mission parameters shortly," Manson concluded. "The rest is up to you two." Dismissed. As they left the room, Selene stayed silent for a moment, her thoughts swirling. The stakes were higher than they'd ever been, and the mission seemed impossible. Yet, despite everything, there was something about Rylan's unwavering confidence that made her feel like they could do it. "You know, I still don't understand how you do it," Selene said, breaking the silence. "Your ability to bounce back after getting torn apart like that. It's beyond what any other species can do." Rylan shrugged as they walked toward the hangar, where their ship was already waiting for takeoff. "Guess we just don't know when to quit." His gaze softened. "Or maybe it's the reason we keep going. We may not have the natural advantages like some species, but we make up for it by never giving up." She looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. His determination, his strength, the way he always seemed to rise no matter how many times he was knocked down. It wasn't just his body healing that fascinated her, it was the resilience of his spirit. They boarded the ship in silence, the tension between them palpable. The next few hours were spent in tactical prep, finalizing their plans for infiltrating the Swarm's fortress. Selene adjusted her gear and weapons, going over her strategies in her head. "You good?" Rylan asked her, his voice low as he double-checked his own equipment. She nodded. "Just thinking." "You're not the only one," he replied with a quick grin. "But we've got this." The ship hummed to life as they ascended into the sky, leaving the medical facility far behind. Selene leaned back in her seat, glancing out the viewports at the stars stretching ahead of them. "Tell me again," she said, voice steady. "What's the plan once we're inside?" "We go in under the cover of night. Disable the sentries, locate the weapon, and shut it down. Simple as that," Rylan said, as though he were talking about a routine mission. "Simple, huh?" Selene smirked. "You know, you have a very relaxed approach to everything." He chuckled, his brown eyes glinting with amusement. "That's because I trust my partner to handle the hard part." Selene couldn't help but smile back. It was hard not to be drawn in by Rylan's confidence and easy charm. But behind it, she knew he had a deep, burning resolve to see this mission through. And she was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to care more about this mission than she had originally planned. More about Rylan. Before they knew it, they were nearing the Dark Swarm's stronghold, a massive structure that loomed ominously in the distance, shrouded in darkness. The ship's descent was slow and careful, barely skimming the surface of the alien planet below. As the ship touched down, the ground trembled beneath them and a low rumble filled the air. "We're here," Rylan said quietly, his voice suddenly serious. Selene's heart beat faster, her focus sharpening. This was it. The moment they had prepared for. "Let's do this," she said, standing up, her voice calm but with a hard edge. Rylan flashed her a grin as they suited up, ready for whatever was coming next. "Just remember," he said, adjusting his gear. "We're not just fighting for survival here. We're fighting for the future." With that, they exited the ship, stepping into the darkness of enemy territory. They were ready. And together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 3: The First Strike. The Dark Swarm's stronghold loomed ahead, its jagged silhouette cutting into the star-filled sky. The air around them was thick with tension, and every step felt like a drumbeat that echoed through the silence of the alien landscape. The scent of ozone lingered from their descent, a constant reminder that they were entering hostile territory. Rylan and Selene moved quickly but quietly, their footsteps barely making a sound against the rocky ground. Selene's green skin blended with the shadows, her body moving with a fluid grace that was as deadly as it was beautiful. Rylan, though more solid and imposing, was no less agile, his prosthetic arm shifting with ease as he scanned their surroundings. "You ready?" Rylan whispered, his voice steady but low, the faintest hint of tension betraying his calm exterior. Selene glanced at him, catching the glint of the new scar tissue across his chest, still pink but healing rapidly. "I've been ready since you insisted on playing hero," she replied, her voice just as quiet. Rylan smirked but said nothing. They'd been over their plan 100 times, but now that they were here, the reality of it settled in. The Dark Swarm had been terrorizing the Alliance for months, their biological weapon a terrifying new addition to their arsenal. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their lives on the line, it would be the entire sectors. They reached the first checkpoint, an ancient, crumbling structure half buried in the dust of the planet. The swarm's base was built into the side of a mountain, a fortress of steel and organic matter twisted together, reflecting the horrors of their tactics. From the intelligence reports, they knew the base was heavily guarded, with sentries patrolling at regular intervals. Selene held up a hand, signaling for them to stop. She studied the area, eyes scanning the terrain for movement. The sentries were closer than they'd expected. Her sharp ears picked up their low voices as they passed, oblivious to the pair crouched in the shadows. "We're getting too close," Selene murmured. "We need to move quickly. The sentries are on a 10-minute rotation, and we'll be spotted if we don't time this right." Rylan nodded, his eyes narrowing. "I'll take the first two, you get the third?" "Understood," Selene responded, her voice a soft whisper of confirmation. Without another word, they separated, moving like ghosts through the darkness. Rylan crept toward the first pair of sentries, his prosthetic arm making no sound as it shifted into its combat configuration. Selene, meanwhile, found her own cover, waiting for the moment when the last guard would be out of position. Rylan's first strike was swift, silent, and efficient. The sentries never had a chance to react as his energy blade sliced through the first, disabling the second before he could sound the alarm. He didn't stop to admire his work, quickly moving on to cover Selene. The third sentry, a large, hulking creature with multiple eyes and sharp mandibles, was still moving on patrol, unaware of his impending fate. He rounded the corner just as Selene emerged from the shadows, her hand moving in a blur as she reached for her energy blade. She could hear the soft sound of his breath through the faceplate of his helmet, the only sound that signaled his presence. But he never even had a chance to make a noise. With a quick, clean strike, Selene's blade cut through the creature's neck, taking him out in one smooth motion. His body crumpled to the ground, dead before he hit the dirt. Rylan jogged over to her, offering a brief nod of approval. "Nice work. Let's keep moving." They continued on, their pace steady and precise, the tension in the air growing thicker as they approached the heart of the swarm's base. The dark, twisted architecture of the fortress seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the deeper they went, the more disorienting the feeling became. "We're close," Rylan said, his voice a low murmur. "The weapon is somewhere ahead. We need to find it and disable it before they launch any more strikes." Selene nodded, scanning the hallway ahead. It was eerie how quiet the place was, too quiet. As if the entire facility was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to close in. Massive metallic doors and strange organic growths lined the hallways. There were no more guards here, at least none that they could see, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before they'd encounter more resistance. "Looks like the main chamber is just beyond this door," Selene observed, pointing to a massive reinforced door at the end of the hallway. "The layout from the intel matches the last known position of the biological weapon." Rylan checked his scanner, confirming the data. "All right, let's breach it." They approached the door with caution, Rylan using his prosthetic arm to slice through the security lock with ease. The door opened with a low hiss, revealing a dimly lit chamber. The center of the room was dominated by a massive, cylindrical containment unit, pulsating with a sickly green light. There it was, the biological weapon contained within a shimmering force field, its vile presence unmistakable. Rylan felt a pang of revulsion at the sight of it, an organism that was part weapon, part creature, its alien form writhing within the containment unit. "I've never seen anything like this," Selene whispered. "This is beyond anything we've ever faced before. We need to disable it," Rylan said firmly, his voice resolute. "We stop this thing and we stop the swarm from being able to deploy it." Selene's mind raced as she analyzed the setup. "There's a control panel over there. If we hack it, we can disable the force field and neutralize the weapon." Rylan nodded. "I'll cover you. Let's move." They moved swiftly but carefully, each step calculated. The chamber was eerily silent, the only sound the hum of the force field that protected the weapon. Rylan kept his senses sharp, watching every shadow, every corner, waiting for the inevitable attack. As Selene reached the control panel, her fingers danced over the keys, working quickly to bypass the security protocols. Just as she input the final command, the ground beneath them trembled. A loud, guttural roar echoed from behind them. "Ambush!" Rylan shouted, spinning around to face the new threat. A swarm of heavily armed swarm soldiers poured into the chamber, their grotesque forms emerging from hidden alcoves, their weapons charged and ready. "Well, looks like we're not getting out easy," Rylan muttered, already moving into position. Selene's eyes hardened. "We finish this now or we don't finish at all." With that, they both dove into action, Rylan charging forward with brutal efficiency, his prosthetic arm transforming into a devastating weapon. Selene followed closely behind, her energy blade humming with deadly intent. The battle had begun, and this time there would be no turning back. Chapter 4: The Fury of Battle. The chamber erupted into chaos as the swarm soldiers advanced, their grotesque forms charging from every direction. The air was filled with the crackle of energy weapons, the shriek of plasma bursts, and the heavy thud of combat boots on the metallic floor. Rylan's muscles tensed as he charged, his prosthetic arm transforming into a wickedly sharp blade. He was a blur of motion, quick, decisive, lethal. He intercepted the first soldier with brutal efficiency, his blade slicing through the alien's armor like butter, sending a spray of greenish blood into the air. "Stay focused." Selene's voice cut through the din as she darted to his side, her movements just as fluid. Her energy blade hummed with deadly intent as she cleaved through another swarm soldier, the blade cutting cleanly through its chest. Rylan barely had time to glance at her before he threw himself into the fray once more, his sidearm now in his hand. He fired 2 rapid shots, taking down another soldier who tried to flank them. "We need to get that force field down," he grunted, his voice barely audible over the battle's noise. "We can't fight them all off if it's still up." Selene, her green skin shimmering with the light of the chamber, nodded without a word. She moved to the control panel, fingers flying over the interface. She wasn't distracted by the chaos around her. She was laser-focused, determined to get the force field down so they could take down the weapon and end this madness. But just as her hand hovered over the final key, a sudden explosion rocked the chamber, sending her stumbling backward. The force field flickered, but it didn't go down. Instead, it flared bright, its edges crackling with energy as the entire structure seemed to come alive. "What the hell?" Rylan barked, barely avoiding a blast from a plasma rifle. He cut down the soldier who'd fired it, then turned to Selene. "Did you disable it?" "I thought I did," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Something triggered the system. I can't break through it manually." "Looks like we're on our own for now," Rylan gritted out. Time to clear the room. He and Selene moved as one, their actions a seamless dance of combat. Rylan was a whirlwind of destruction, his prosthetic arms slicing through the enemy lines with brutal precision. Each swing was deadly, each move calculated to cripple and disable. Selene, equally deadly, used her agility to her advantage, darting between foes with impossible grace, her energy blade flashing with deadly light as she hacked through their ranks. The swarm soldiers were relentless, but they weren't used to the speed and efficiency of their opponents. Rylan and Selene had learned each other's movements in the heat of battle, their teamwork tight and seamless. Every attack, every counter, every move was instinctive. But the longer the battle raged, the more the numbers seemed to multiply. More swarm soldiers poured in, their grotesque, multi-eyed faces twisted in malicious glee. The sheer weight of their assault was beginning to wear on the pair. "We need to clear the perimeter," Selene shouted, her voice urgent as she cleaved through yet another soldier. She stepped back, quickly assessing the situation. "They're using the walls as cover and they're too spread out. If we don't push forward, we'll be overrun." "Agreed," Rylan said through gritted teeth, his eyes scanning for an opening. His prosthetic arm shifted again, becoming a powerful cannon-like weapon. "Let's make some room." With a quick flick of his wrist, Rylan fired a series of energy blasts into the group closest to them, clearing a path through the soldiers. The explosion sent several swarm bodies flying, but it was only a temporary reprieve. They were still surrounded. "Selene," Rylan called, his voice filled with urgency. "I'm not going to be able to hold them off much longer. Get that force field down now." Selene's brow furrowed as she turned back to the control panel, her fingers flying over the interface with practiced precision. But just as her hand reached for the final button, an alien voice boomed from the doorway. "Enough." The swarm soldiers parted to reveal a towering figure, its body a mass of twisted organic armor, pulsating with dark energy. Its many eyes glowed with malice, and a low growl rumbled from its throat. Rylan's grip tightened around his weapon, and Selene's posture shifted, ready for whatever this new threat would throw at them. "I am Syrax, leader of the swarm," the creature bellowed. "You think you can stop us? You will die here, just like the rest of your kind." Rylan's jaw clenched. "We're not here to die," he snapped. "And neither are you." Syrax's many eyes narrowed as the creature stalked forward, its massive form towering over them both. It raised a twisted, jagged blade high, crackling with dark energy. "Then you will fall as your kind always does," Syrax hissed. Before Rylan could react, the creature lunged. With a growl, Rylan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the swing of Syrax's weapon. The blow hit the floor with an earth-shattering impact, sending debris flying. Rylan scrambled to his feet and fired several quick shots at Syrax's exposed flank, but the shots barely seemed to faze the towering creature. "Cover me," Selene shouted, her voice filled with determination. Rylan didn't hesitate. He provided covering fire, keeping Syrax distracted as Selene darted toward the control panel. With a swift movement, she keyed in the final sequence, and the force field around the biological weapon flickered and dissipated, leaving it vulnerable. Rylan's eyes widened as he saw the weapon for the first time in its full, terrifying form. It was a massive alien organism, twisted and grotesque, suspended in a semi-liquid state inside the now-deactivated force field. Rylan's stomach churned at the sight of it. "We need to destroy it," he growled. "Now." But Syrax, seemingly enraged, turned to face them with a roar. "You will not touch my creation." With a swift motion, Syrax hurled his weapon toward them, its jagged edge cutting through the air. Chapter 5. A Fragile Alliance. The explosion of sound as Syrax's weapon struck the ground behind them reverberated through the room like a shockwave. Rylan barely had time to process the massive surge of energy before Selene yanked him out of the way, her strength surprising him every time she did so. "Focus," Selene shouted, her green skin glowing from the proximity to the crackling energy field still swirling around the room. Her eyes, sharp as ever, remained locked on the creature now charging toward them, its grotesque form an amalgamation of unnatural strength and fury. Rylan didn't need to be told twice. His prosthetic arm morphed quickly from the bladed form to a more practical plasma cannon, locking onto Syrax. He fired a series of concentrated blasts, each one hitting its mark, but the creature seemed to absorb the energy, its skin shimmering like some kind of armored plating. The plasma cannon's energy pulses weren't enough. "Damn it," Rylan growled, his mind racing for another strategy. But Syrax was closing in and quickly. Selene didn't hesitate. Her energy blade hummed to life in her hand, and she dashed forward, her movements graceful yet deadly. She aimed for the creature's exposed flank, where Rylan had managed to score some minor damage earlier. The energy blade connected with a searing hiss, but Syrax barely flinched. "You think a little wound will stop me?" Syrax growled, his voice vibrating the walls as he swung his own jagged weapon toward Selene. Rylan's heart pounded as he watched the blade sail toward her. He wasn't going to make it in time. Without thinking, he threw himself forward, taking the blow meant for Selene. The sharp edge of Syrax's weapon slashed across his shoulder, tearing through his combat armor and cutting deep into his flesh. Pain exploded in Rylan's mind, but his prosthetic arm extended at the same time, locking onto Syrax's weapon and wrenching it out of the creature's grip. He wasn't going to let Selene die on his watch. "You will pay?" Rylan spat, his voice rough from pain. The creature howled in fury, but Rylan was already moving. With a grunt of exertion, he threw his shoulder into Syrax's massive body, pushing the creature back and giving Selene the opening she needed. Rylan could barely hear the sound of her blade as it sliced through the air. There was no time for thought, only action. Selene's next strike was a precision cut across Syrax's neck. The creature let out a low, strangled roar, but it wasn't enough to finish it. "Finish it!" Rylan shouted, his voice strained. Selene's eyes flared with determination, and with a single final strike, her energy blade cleaved into Syrax's neck. There was a sickening sound as the creature's head fell to the ground with a final, resounding thud. The room fell silent. Breathing heavily, Rylan staggered backward, his hand clutching his side where the wound still bled. His vision blurred as he struggled to stay upright. "Rylan!" Selene cried, rushing to his side. Her fingers were gentle as they touched his shoulder, but Rylan could feel the urgency in her touch. "I'm fine," he rasped, though the pain was undeniable. "We finished it. That's what matters." But Selene wasn't listening. Her hand moved quickly to the communication unit on her wrist, sending an urgent distress signal. "This is Lieutenant Valera. We need medical extraction immediately. We've neutralized the threat, but Lieutenant Fallon is in critical condition." Rylan gritted his teeth as Selene helped him to his knees. He could feel the blood slipping through his fingers and he hated how weak he felt. "No need for an evac. I'm fine." He managed a half-smile, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "You really think you're fine?" Selene's tone was sharp, almost exasperated. "You can barely stay awake and you're bleeding out in front of me. You're not fine, Rylan." For a moment, he could see the vulnerability in her eyes, something he hadn't expected. There was something deeper than just mission protocol in her gaze. "We'll get you back to the medical bay," she continued, her voice low and steady. "We'll fix this." Rylan shook his head. "I don't need fixing." Her fingers tightened on his arm, holding him steady, even as the medical team arrived in a blur of motion. Alien medics, skilled in advanced healing techniques, quickly assessed his injuries. The moment they set to work, his body was flooded with a cooling, numbing sensation, the healing gel working to seal his wounds. "You are indeed resilient," one of the medics remarked, raising an eyebrow as he checked the readings on Rylan's vitals. "Your healing ability far surpasses what we anticipated." "I'm human," Rylan muttered, his voice barely audible as the pain began to subside. "We're not as fragile as you think." Selene stood by his side, watching as the medics continued their work. There was a softness to her expression now, a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself before. "Maybe I misjudged you," she whispered, almost to herself. "Maybe I misjudged all of you." Rylan's eyes fluttered as the effects of the treatment took hold. He gave a weak chuckle despite the pain. "I've been hearing that a lot lately." As the medics finished and began preparing for his transport back to the Alliance's medical facility, Rylan turned to Selene, his voice steady despite his weakened state. "I'm not done yet, Lieutenant. Not by a long shot." Selene met his gaze, her face softening. "We'll see. But next time, let's avoid getting impaled by alien weapons, all right?" Rylan chuckled, the sound weak but sincere. "No promises." As the medical transport ascended, taking them away from the battlefield and back to the relative safety of the Alliance's main medical facility, Selene and Rylan sat in the quiet aftermath of their victory. Their bond had strengthened in ways neither of them could have anticipated, the battle not only changing the course of their mission but changing the way they saw each other. In the end, it was clear, humans were far more than fragile creatures. They were warriors, resilient, powerful, and capable of overcoming anything, even the darkest of threats. And, perhaps, there was more to their partnership than either of them had expected.